Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm JD Talasik. I'm the Director of Cultural Programs at the National Academy of Sciences. I'm so glad that everybody is here with us today. We're continuing a conversation with that we started with the CDC Foundation. If you'll bear with me just a second, I'm going to start this PowerPoint. Boosting Vaccine Confidence with the Arts was a webinar that we had back in April 14th, 2022. And this gathering the salon is kind of an offspring to kind of continue some of the recommendations that were made. There were some objectives that we had for that, and I'd like to share these objectives and some of the findings that we had as a way of providing background information and a reason for why we started these salons, and that we, might be able to help us shape the direction that we want to take them. So, the webinar that we had was to provide support and peer-to-peer networking for the CDC Foundation. And some of the grants that they had already given out. So these were projects that were already in process. And so the webinar provided an opportunity for a response to some needs that were being facilitated. We also wanted to better understand best practices for engaging in the arts in this manner, and to provide a space where people could share some of the challenges and some of the barriers, as well as some of the successes that the grantees were having at the time. And then to inform future convenings by us. And that's what we're doing here at the salon. So hopefully that'll provide a little bit of a context. The CDC at the time, CDC Foundation had created a needs assessment. And these 4 topics were were identified as the top areas that we needed to explore, and so we created topic sessions and discussion groups around these, such as monitoring and evaluating the impact of the projects. That seemed to be sort of the area that most people were needing to talk about and to find some solutions or some direction. Building partnerships with other stakeholders, such as churches, museums, civic groups. Pretty vast the way that many of the projects were being organized, and the need and opportunities that they had to form community groups. Third, understanding cultural sensitivity and creating culturally effective communications around those. Sort of the big lesson learned is that one message doesn't fit all. So creating and understanding the audience that one was trying to reach was part of that. Creating and sustaining collaborations with healthcare communities and other sectors, which seems to be really important in the sense of moving forward and continuing these types of practices. So there were some key outcomes. There were 4. And I'm just going to go through what we found rather quickly. Creating safe spaces for people to talk about their fears seemed to be sort of the big overarching topic. It wasn't so much about talking about vaccines or providing additional information about the vaccine. In other words, data didn't move it, stories moved and changed people, and having a place for those stories to be heard, to be expressed and heard, to hear those fears and vulnerabilities was one of the ideals that came out. Also, just sort of an acknowledgement that people who were vaccine hesitant had very legitimate reasons for being so, not trusting policy, public health officials, the healthcare system, not trusting the media. And those again were stories that needed to be heard and not dismissed. Third, it was just the human to human connection. that being able to connect with people on an individual basis, positive peer pressure was a phrase that came out, and being able to reach people in that way. And then it was also just the idea of how do we evaluate success. It's the question of qualitative versus quantitative metrics. But that was basically our original sort of excursion into this discussion with the CDC. And I will stop sharing my screen now, I think. So, excuse me. I have so delighted to have Jill Sonke agree to help organize and lead these groups. She has done so much work with the CDC around this topic, and is, of course, at the Center for Art and Medicine at the University of Florida. And Jill, I'd like to turn the floor over to you, and look forward to hearing some of the work that you've been doing. And then we'll start introductions and hopefully have a rich discussion about what the state is at this point, and how we might continue to grow and use this salon platform as a way of moving forward. So welcome, Jill.
Thank you, JD. It's great to be here with you all. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm really looking forward to this conversation this afternoon. And I'm here and going to take just a few minutes to hopefully just touch on a few topics that will facilitate our dialogue this afternoon. So I'm going to share a few slides. I'm going to bring forward some information from the field guides that I know you're all very familiar with, the two field guides that that the CDC created in order to drive cross-sector collaboration between public health and health communication and arts and culture folks in the US. I know you know this stuff, I just want to say that. But again, I want to just sort of bring a few specific things this afternoon and invite you to just notice where, as these points come by you again, you sort of feel yourself go, oh, we're in that. Oh, we're in that, right? Oh, we're dealing with that. Because I'm hoping we can talk about some of the things that you are all experiencing in your partnerships, and can, as a peer community, talk through those things. So I'm going to touch just a little bit on partnering and partnerships. Then just a little bit on evaluation and on funding, and then we can dive into introductions and dialogue this afternoon. So let me take just a second and share my screen. Okay, again, just meaning to drive our dialogue. So just notice what's kind of stimulating some thinking on your part as we go through these. So really, this is reminders for all of us of sort of aspects of partnerships that we recognize are really critical, specifically in cross-sector partnerships, recognizing that health and public health and healthcare cultures are very, very different from arts and cultures, right? So you may be at a stage in your work where you're experiencing some of the benefits, some of the joys, and some of the challenges of this way of working. So in the partnership guide, which again, I know you're all very familiar with, this information is elaborated on a little bit, but I wanted to touch on one segment of our how-tos related to partnerships. So recognizing that in these sorts of partnerships, it's critically important that artists and culture bearers are engaged as equal level partners with public health and health professionals. And in doing that, I think it's really critical in the partnerships that, of course, everybody's compensated as equitably as possible, and there are no expectations that artists do what they do because they love it. And so, should be an honor for them to do it in association and in partnership with a public health partner. You know, we want to take great care around those sorts of expectations and assumptions and paradigm shifting really in this space, and set a precedent for that sort of equal partnership. And of course, it's based on shared knowledge, sharing of theoretical foundations, values, and practices in each sector. And from my perspective as an artist and a public health professional, but as an artist, I really believe that the knowledge that artists practice from has never been more needed in the health sector. So that knowledge sharing and valuing is critically important. And of course, I know you're all working with your communities and building community leadership and ownership and listening to the concerns in your communities, responding to the histories you may be running up against, some of the histories around public health in your communities. So it'd be great to think and talk about any of that that's coming up for you today. Also, we really tried to lift up in the guides use of the arts as a means for trust building and knowledge sharing. So of course, trust is essential to partnerships. We always say change happens at the speed of trust. Change won't be made without trust in communities. So it's critically important in partnerships, especially those that are attempting to make change, that time is taken to attend to and care for the partnerships themselves. Partnerships don't come for free. They have tremendous value, and time investment is really, really critical. And in these partnerships, we also really have to recognize the historical and ongoing injustices related to distrust of government and health systems in our communities, especially as we're thinking about vaccine confidence and vaccination as an issue. So I'm really curious to see what you all are experiencing in that regard. And expectations, again, a part of trust and strong partnerships is being really clear in expectations. We talk about this sort of what am I here to give? What am I here to get? Recognizing that resource sharing is really critical to partnerships. And one of the biggest danger points, I think, in a partnership is hidden expectations. So we must bring forward all of the things that we're there to give and to get in a partnership, and not feel shy, especially about what we're there to get, what we need from each other as partners. And that's often where we get tripped up, is people aren't comfortable sharing that part of an expectation. And inherent with that, within that, is the need to create equitable and accessible structures for managing partnerships, time, communications, and expectations, mapping, tracking, articulating those expectations. And again, engaging your partners at every stage of the work. We come to these sorts of partnerships specific to artists in the arts with a history of artists being brought in at the end to make something pretty or to roll it out to the public. So we really need to be sensitive to those histories as well in these partnerships. And again, honor everyone as equal partnerships, and taking time to nurture the partnerships, to play, to relate, to celebrate, all of the things that nurture relationships hold true for partnerships. And we have really found, in terms of again, the tripping points in partnerships, that time is the biggest. When we ask people what are the barriers to partnership, it's pretty much always time. But we just can't underscore enough that investment of some time will yield so much in a partnership. So making sure that we don't just come together to work and to accomplish, but we come together to nurture our partnership, and to think about our partnership. I think I've touched on this enough. Again, being really transparent in your partnership and your partnerships is really critical. So the sort of hidden value propositions are really important to bring forward. And a reminder to use arts-based methods. We've got some amazing poets on this, this call today. Poetry is such a beautiful method for trust building and for relating and for partnership and for communicating. Theater, games, there's all sorts of moving together can change the dynamic in a partnership space in a really efficient way. So don't forget the language of the arts and of culture as you're nurturing your partnerships. So again, one of the key challenges that we find people express around partnership is funding and resources. You know, well, we just don't have enough money to do it this way or to do this, or we don't have the resources. And partnerships are a way of combining resources, getting access to resources, including non-fiscal resources, knowledge, right? Space, those sorts of things. Relationships, social capital is a huge, huge asset that can come through partnership. So recognizing that a really critical need to be transparent, again, around what you're there to get, what you're there to give in the partnership. Language and communication barriers comes up in this space as well. Cultural differences, health people speak differently than arts people a lot. I think those languages are starting to, the gaps are closing a little bit in this space. But developing a common language, I just came out of a partnership meeting in which, we said, wait, we need next meeting, we start with 20 minutes to talk about language, because the way each of us uses the words impacts, outcomes, evaluation, research are just a little bit different. So we need to take some time, to think about how we use these words. So that sort of layer of the partnership, I think, is really critically important. And lastly, differences in professional cultures, right? That means different priorities, different values, different ways of thinking, communicating, different ways of doing, right? The different ways of doing can be really critically important. What we expect, are our cameras on, are our cameras off? Are we looking at the camera? Do we, all the sort of small ways of doing, how we email those things. We always come with expectations that people are like us, right? It's just human nature to some extent, so being really mindful of that in partnerships and coming with curiosity and openness. It's actually so much fun and so delightful to learn different ways of doing and to understand the contexts from which your own ways of doing come, and being willing to change those, I think, is really important. So these differences, I think, in partnerships are incredible assets. They bring so much benefits, and those benefits really outweigh the cost, again, related to the time that it takes to understand those differences and to communicate around them. So again, I'm not going into any depth with these last two slides. I really just want to kind of touch on these issues and then invite you again to reflect on what came up for you and all these bullet points, what resonated with where you are now in your work. So I am certain that you're all in some stage of evaluation of your work, whether it's process evaluation, looking at have you done what you set out to do? Is your program producing what was intended? Are you out looking at outcomes? Are you looking at how and to what extent the program is achieving the changes that you intended to affect in your communities? And impacts, is your work achieving its larger goals? So again, I presume you're all in various stages of that, and I'm hoping we can dive into some discussion of that this afternoon. Lastly, I'm working on a new guide for the CDC, a funding guide. And in that guide, we're really diving into building sustainable partnerships, not just for vaccine confidence, but for bringing to bear in whatever is coming up around public health issues and communities, and just the ongoing work that we do in communities. So in this guide, we're really unpacking how to utilize new funding sources, where to get grants, where to look for grants, and how to use existing funding and resources, again, fiscal and non-fiscal resources. So how to look to existing budgets, and recognizing that it's very interesting when we look at public health program budgets and arts and culture program budgets. There's these really interesting, not only overlaps, but sort of mirror reflections in that, in public health programs, huge priority is community engagement, right? How do we get to the people? How do we reach the people? It's the same in arts and cultural programs. How do we build audiences? Every arts and cultural budget, especially venue-based budget, has resources there. So when we bring our programs together in partnerships, we can often both utilize those existing resources to accomplish the goals of a program. So we'll be sharing this resource hopefully in the next couple of months. But again, just want to invite you to think about where you are with your funding. Is it different than you expected? Are the things you need to spend money on, and are the resources you need different at this stage of your work? So I invite some dialogue around that as well. So I'm going to turn us over now to invitations. We will be happy to share those slides. Again, I put in, JD and I were joking as we came onto the call today. My slides are the best example of the worst PowerPoint presentation you could ever see, full of bullet points. But again, I wanted to sort of stimulate your thinking today, and also that information will be available to you via the slides. So before we dive into dialogue, I would love to do a little round of introductions. JD, do you want to say anything before we roll into that?
Other than saying, Jill, thank you. That was just wonderful. PowerPoint aside, your thoughts, your insight, the work that you've done on these things, it's so groundbreaking, and I'm so grateful that you're part of this conversation, helping us lead through this. I will ask Ryan. Ryan, I think, had posted a collaborative document for Google, but also there is a Google Drive that's available for us, where I think, Jill, if you're okay, that's where we will put the slide presentation that you just gave. But I'm looking forward to meeting. I know a few people on the call, and Jill, I'll let you kind of call on people and then direct the conversation.
Great.
But maybe if at this point, if you could share with us your name, if you're affiliated with an institution or program, but also maybe just share a little bit about your successes, your challenges in this area, whether you're working on a project specifically. And I think there's other people who may not be specifically involved in a project right now, but have some experience with this, if you would share that as well. So Jill, why don't I let you lead us?
Be happy to, JD. Thank you. And Alana, I wonder if you would start us off.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alana Quinn with the Cultural Programs Office. I work closely with JD. We have been working, I've worked at the NAS for about 18 years, so I've been working with JD for a while. It's great to be here today.
Thank you, Alana. Thank you for helping to organize us.
You're welcome.
And Ryan, can we come to you?
Sure, and thank you, Jill. I was I had so many thoughts going as you were speaking, so I'm excited for the discussion. I'm Ryan McGranagan. I have a science and engineering background, and my way into these salons, and JD and Alana, has been to help coordinate some of these cross-cultural, cross-community conversations. And that's led to these number of different salons that we've been leading, these series to kind of move from conversation towards activation. And so my background is in space physics, but I come at that from a systems perspective. And part of that has just been broadened in understanding what is the role of art and actually doing that. And I really appreciated your point, Jill, about not thinking of art as something that helps the scientists communicate their work, but working hand in hand alongside the scientific method throughout the process, and inviting that to be part of it. So I'm really excited to be here talking with everyone today, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much. David.
Hello, everybody. I'm David Hassler, director of the Wick Poetry Center at Kent State University in Ohio. I'm here with my colleague and friend, Tyler Meyer. We were invited, I think, because of the project we launched called the Global Vaccine Poem Project in March of 2021, which we then were able to turn into a book, Dear Vaccine, that came out in March 2022. A 1 year timeline for the project launch to an actual publication. But thrilled to be in this conversation in the salon at the Wick Poetry Center. We're always finding new innovative ways to bring poetry as a tool to engage people in deeper conversations around important topics in their communities and with themselves. And Poets for Science, we have a project with Jane Hirschfield that went to the National Mall in 2017. And now the Dear Vaccine and some other healing stanzas workshops we've been doing with healthcare workers and nurses nationally as well. So thrilled to be a part of this salon.
So great, David. Thank you. We're so excited about your work. Tyler, would you like to follow?
For sure. Happy to do that. Hi, everybody. My name is Tyler Meyer. Greetings from Tucson, Arizona, from the blowtorch. And we have not melted yet, but it's threatening. I work as the director of the University of Arizona Poetry Center. So very much a sister and collaborative partner with what David is doing at Kent State and with some other peer versions of these centers around the country. We're slightly different than David. We're a large poetry library, one of the largest standalone poetry collections in the country. And David mentioned the Deer Vaccine Project, which has been one of our big interests and pushes. And we've just been really thrilled to hear, even in the way that the conversation's been framed, Jill, is the ways in which arts can be a site of trust, and that can be leveraged in ways that are really powerful. And so thrilled to be collaborating with you all and thinking with you all and learning from you all. So thanks for letting us join in.
Beautiful, Tyler. Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to talk more about trust today. That's such a great topic. Theo.
Hey everybody, Theo Edmonds. I'm in Denver, Colorado. For the last year or so, I've been the Associate Dean for Transdisciplinary Research and Innovation at the College of Arts and Media, but getting ready to step into a much more expanded university-wide role called the Imaginator Academy. And I'll drop some links. We just launched a national census on creativity and belonging in the workforce. Really what we're trying to look at is how are Americans' multidimensional identity shaping our innovation capacity as a nation. And so it's measures of creativity, belonging, trust, hope, curiosity, sense of awe, a lot of things that we don't typically think about as being predictive indicators. And the network is connected to a global group I sit on. It's a commission of the EU and the OECD called the Brain Capital Alliance, of using neuroscience to direct economic development policy in the EU. And so putting all of that together, I think a lot about this particular work has a lot to do with identity and how the historical approaches by governments and companies to certain people and their identities have shaped how willing or not willing they are to receive information, to work with, et cetera. And so I think that we're at a place where some very interesting things can happen. I think it's gonna have to get a little messy first. We've got, I was really happy to hear Jill's comment about the shared language. I think that is probably one of the biggest things holding us back. Us academics get paid to write $15 words that 0.3% of the population can understand, when a nickel word might bump it up to 90% of the population understanding it. But language and poetry and the arts is another form of communication and language. So I think all this is really, really timely. And what we learn here can be applied to many other things that go well beyond vaccine as we move forward as a nation. So just encourage us to kind of think about more expansively about what we're learning and what other application we might have.
Beautiful, Theo. Thank you so much. Kathy, would you like to go next?
I would say that I'm here today as a learner and a processor. I put in the chat the website for a project I've been working on for the past year called Project Healings. And the website is at projecthealings.info. So I work for the Diversity Council in Rochester, Minnesota. And our proposal, we basically got the only HRSA funded grant to deal with vaccine hesitancy, misinformation, and access issues for the entire state of Minnesota. So we had $1 million to work with to involve our 20 grassroots organizations in an effort to create culturally and linguistically appropriate resource information, social media reach outs, and then we had a pot of money for mini grants to fund amazing events. And as our year progressed and our partnerships grew and we were heard about, we had many arts organizations stepping up for funding to bring their cultural their cultural events, sometimes their Heritage Month, more into the mainstream. You know, by having more money, they could have a venue like the Mall of America, the state capitol. You know, they could do more to create their arts, which included dance and musical performances. And so, of course, coming at the end of a project like that, I'm starting to think about a narrative and putting words on it and thinking about what maybe would be amazing to do next. So I'm really happy to be here today to learn from all of you and see what other efforts have happened in this past year and, well, past year, past 2 years, past 2.5 years, however you want to put it. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kathy, so much. It is really wonderful. Thomas, could we hear from you next?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jill. I'm Thomas Brazel. I'm the operations manager at Out of Hand Theater, and I'm our project director for our vaccine confidence program. My colleague here, Ariel Fristo, is our artistic director. And we created a program that's a vaccine confidence program that utilized a film that we made that was inspired by stories from Southwest and North Central Georgia, as well as parts of Alabama over their time the past 2 years during the pandemic. Most of these communities were African-American communities. And what we've been doing is now going into our 3rd week with the program being implemented. We go into communities with large events, usually that are around either health fairs or, like last weekend was Juneteenth. Actually, this Thursday, I'll be in Southwest Georgia doing a field day event that will show the film. We combine with DASER Garage Theater here in Atlanta. We build like a large arts event with a lot of activities, bring the community together, and they see the films, and then there's a talk-back discussion afterwards with a health professional. A lot of times right now it's with someone from CORE in the Department of Public Health. And it's been very, very eye-opening and rewarding in that I can tell that their hearts are opened and they're willing to ask questions that they would not normally be feeling safe to ask. The film does touch them. Everyone says the word moving, emotional, and relevant. So to me, that's great. And I know that we built a lot of partnerships, have been growing from in just 2 weeks since we've been rolling it out. Honestly, it's hard to keep up, trying to share the resources and assets and make sure that they're utilized to the best of their ability as well. But feedback has been great, and it's been a great year working on this project. And I'm just happy to be here and hear from everyone else and share our successes and things that we're still trying to figure out as well as we continue to move forward with this work. So thank you.
So great, Thomas. Thank you. Ariel.
Hi, I'm Ariel Fristo. I'm the artistic director of Out of Hand Theater and Thomas's colleague. We're based in Atlanta, and our programs, as Thomas described, our programs combine short pieces of theater and film with information and conversation to advance social justice, mostly issues related to either racial justice or economic justice or both. And we develop and implement these programs in partnership with some combination, a different combination on each project of government agencies, businesses, schools, and social justice organizations. And so on this program, that information piece is a very short informational video, which sort of gives you some facts about COVID and the vaccine and how to access it. And our partners, as Thomas described, we have local government and health and sometimes also faith partners in the counties that we developed the program with, and then in the counties where we roll it out. And we're also partnering with the Georgia Department of Public Health to continue this program past this year to roll it out statewide to hotspots over the next 2 years. And all of this is kind of part of Out of Hand's recipe for programs, and that all of our programs combine art to open hearts, information to open minds, and conversation to process thoughts and feelings and make a plan for action.
That's Beautiful, Ariel. Thank you. This is amazing, everybody. Pamela, would you go next?
Yes. Hello, everybody. It's an honor to even be in this Zoom room. Along with my colleagues that just spoke before, we are lucky enough to be in one of the CDC Foundation grantees to boost vaccine confidence through the arts. We had also been lucky enough to work in the same field by doing 125 days of daily music performance at the Javits Center in their vaccination facility at the very beginning of the pandemic, and to work with you, Jill. Our co-founders, Monica Yunus and Camille Zamora, were working in that field to make sure that we got musicians back up and working and the arts moving as fast as possible. So talking about language, that was more of a universal language, and our project kind of got very specific because we made a 30-minute musical geared towards middle school students called Don't Throw Away Your Shot, which was a conversation about trust. It was a conversation not about telling people that they needed to get vaccinated, but to explore why they might not feel comfortable, and to have the language and the tools to be in the hands of the students, who are the ones that would have to make the decisions for themselves. And that show is followed up with a talkback conversation with a role play exercise to continue to get the kids thinking, feeling, talking to their parents, talking to their teachers, just making sure that they are making that decision for themselves. So it's been really a giant learning experience for us, because when we're able to get into the room, the response is so heartwarming and it's fulfilling, and we've been able to change people's minds and make sure that they get vaccinated and to talk with their parents. But getting in the room is so difficult, and making sure that that language is being received from the very beginning to even begin the conversation is where we found our biggest sources of struggle. Because like you said, once the minds are open, once people are receptive, then it goes so far. So I'm very happy to be able to continue the conversation in this room today.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for sharing all that. That is food for dialogue, right? So much to unpack there. Thank you. Penelope.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I had to go away there for a minute. And first of all, I'm the person who was supposed to be part of the April dialogue and who had a massive power outage and couldn't support you all and be with you. And so I'm here today mostly just to thank you for everything that you're doing and be a strong supporter. I wrote in the chat a lot of what my background includes. As you can see, I'm now an elder, and so my breadth and depth of my experience ranges across community investment, impact investment, but most importantly for the last decade, I'm passionate about how we can invest in the work of artists in order to ensure an equitable future for us all. And I really agree with Theo about a lot of the questions of language. I think language is really holding us back. And I'm very keen on ways in which we can utilize all the work that you're doing right now in this area of vaccination positive messages to integrate it into the broader sort of set of systemic issues that I think are very messy right now, but I actually think artists are critical actors in helping us solve, along with the public health field. So the whole idea of being more upstream, the idea of the well-being of communities is I think what I'll probably dedicate the rest of my life to. So it's very important to me to be supporting you today.
Thank you so much, Penelope. That is so beautiful. We're so grateful to have you here. Deborah, would you like to go next?
Sure. Sorry that I don't have a camera available right now. My name's Deborah Berliner, and I work in the immunization program at Public Health Seattle King County. And I'm completely in learning and listening mode, 100%, because to be completely frank, this is exciting to be in a space with folks like you. You're not the typical community that I work with. And so I have tons to learn. My colleague, maybe some of you know, Meredith Lee Volmer, is recommended participating in today's workshop. I think she couldn't make it. I will actually put a link. She just published a great book called Graphic Public Health, which is all about like putting into images what public health does and means, with a lot of experiences from our health department. And under her leadership, our department has done a lot of trying to develop vaccine communications in ways that resonate beyond just like standard public health language. And it's most certainly a learning curve. So thank you for opening the space up to me.
Thank you for being here, Deborah. Claire, would you like to go next?
Yes, I'm happy to. I can turn on my camera briefly and then I will be in transit. Hi, everybody. Claire Rice. I work in an organization called Arts Alliance Illinois. It is a advocacy, policy, and service organization based in Chicago, statewide in scope. And today I'm here in the context of our vaccine work, of course. We actually started this work well in the early part of the pandemic through mostly private funding to engage artists across the state, captains in different geographies across the state that then hired artists to do a lot of the work that you all have been talking about, right? Using their medium, using their various media to improve vaccine confidence. What I think is so incredible is that, initial private donation has then turned into a Chicago specific public health grant, and then the CDC grant as well. So it's been kind of a multi-pronged proof of concept kind of over and over and throughout the course of the pandemic. And it's been just kind of an extraordinary expansion also as an advocacy and service organization of our network of artists that, maybe found out who we were through this work. So I think we're thinking about maybe three things that I'll offer up to the community to chew on a little bit. Number one, what does it look like to continue to use this type of model of artist engagement, maybe not only in public health and healthcare settings, but also to address other civic and social issues. So that's sort of one concept, is like, how do we keep this going, beyond this vaccine work? Number two, like, how do we, for us as an advocacy and service organizations, it's extremely important. It's as important as the vaccine adoption in some ways, right? To reframe the way artists are engaging in community. So this is a public will project. This is a public will for the arts project. And it's reorienting the way folks see artists in their communities as totally in a different frame of relevance, in a different frame of reference. And I'm really excited about that work and want us to think about what that means for advocacy and service organizations to be doing this type of work, which is, I think, a very different context than most of you who are coming out of producing or presenting type artistic organizations. And then finally, I'll say that this is one part of a four-part, workforce development strategy for us. We're doing a lot of other workforce development, both policy interventions at the state, but then also some interesting work, both in the health and healthcare spaces around tapping into traditional workforce development systems and engaging artists and celebrating artists as opposed to extracting from artists in traditional workforce development context. So I think there's a conversation to be had here about, what does it look like to move from maybe sort of the shorter term nature of this project-based work into longer term sustainability and workforce development programs for artists in health and healthcare. And I'll leave it there. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you, Claire. So good to see you here and to hear from you. Boy, I am so inspired. I am so inspired by what you're all doing and the ways in which you're thinking about your work. And I want to shift us into dialogue because we have a lot that's going to be really interesting to talk about. I'm hearing themes around trust, around language, around beyond vaccines. Those are sort of three things I'm really hearing, and lots of other things as well. Where do you want to go from here? What should we talk about? Should we start with language? I feel like we could go from language to trust, and that might be interesting, and then move into sort of the longer term. I'm going to try to watch the chat here. I'm seeing a little bit in there.
Jill,
Oh, thank you,
could I
Chris.
jump in, because that's exactly where my
Please.
thoughts were going. And while people are kind of thinking about what they would like to say, I'd like to just kind of share some of my thoughts back when we worked with the CDC Foundation. And we were developing the title of what we were going to call this webinar. We kept on trying to come up with something jazzy, and we kind of ended up with just, sort of the basic boosting vaccine confidence with the arts, not through the arts, not using the arts, but with the arts. But even with the ideal that we've set a goal, and obviously there's a need for boosting vaccine confidence. Most of us involved in this believe that people need to be vaccinated. Certainly the funders of all of these believe that we need to move forward. But, they're even within that title, and we talked about, the use of words, even within that title, there was this like little itch in the back of my head that this is missing something, that it's like it really is coming at it from the standpoint of using arts to, or assuming that arts are going to be able to get people to go in and just get vaccinated. And all the conversations that we heard today, that we heard during the webinar previously, was like, engaging with the arts is really about creating that safe space where we listen. And so there's this whole process that has to happen before we can start boosting vaccine confidence. We need to create these spaces to listen, and that we're there's a huge lack of trust. And I think this is in the medical profession and the science profession that needs to be addressed. And it's not an automatic, the CDC says that we need to do this, we need to do this. Those days are fortunately or unfortunately gone. And there's the role of the artist is to create those spaces where trust can be established again. So that was actually just something that had been tickling in the back of my mind ever since we started just trying to develop the language on what we were going to call the webinar. And I don't think that we succeeded, but I think that it's an interesting thing to look at the shortcomings of that title as a sort of a basis to say that really kind of outlines part of the problem, so anyway, I'd welcome other people's thoughts, their perspective, and as Jill was saying, I think these are wonderful areas to explore.
Yeah, thank you, JD. And I want to invite other comments, and I want to just add one piece to that. I mean, this issue of, the arts we unpacked in the guides, what is it about the arts, and we know that the arts facilitate dialogue. We know that the CDC came, to this work because they recognize that artists and culture bearers are trusted members of communities, right? And I think one thing that we haven't talked about, that I'm actually thinking about and writing an article about now, is that in this equation, when we as public health recognize that arts and culture as a sector can offer us something we need, which is building trust with communities, right? Public health has a lot to gain in that equation. Artists have trust in communities, and they have a lot to lose potentially, right? And I think that's a part of this dialogue that we're not yet having much of. How do we approach this work to ensure that artists don't lose the trust and the social capital that they have in their communities, right? How do we take care around that? So I'd love to hear, the others of you mentioned trust. I'd love to hear some other thoughts. What are you thinking about? Just feel free to just jump in. Thomas?
Yeah, that was a big thing for us, was building an area of trust. A lot of these communities, even when we did our interview process, there was a lot of mistrust with public health. And some of these people were even nurses and doctors as well. So they had their concerns, and it was great just to have them feel like, being one-on-one, that they were being heard. A lot of these communities early on, we started with Albany, Georgia, which is if you remember March of 2020, they had the funerals and some of the weddings, and there was a big outbreak and a lot of people died within weeks. And then they were, especially here in Georgia, were basically painted as the poster child for what not to do. And those communities felt very, very hurt by that. And like they were just made to look like no one really understood why this is important to their communities, right? Why is it important for them to gather? Everyone knows everyone's name on every block there. And it really hurt them a lot. So for us, I think what we found with art is that it does help people prime them to have conversation. You know, you think about when people go to the movies or even watch a TV show, they can go online afterwards and talk for hours and chat, be on the TikToks and stuff, and like they're searching more about it because for some reason art attaches here to the heart, and then that works its way to the mind. And so when you have that, we found in the same setting, it does, in a way, it just seems like the community's together, they're enjoying the community, and then they're seeing something that may make them laugh, may make them cry or whatnot. And then there's an information right afterwards that connects back to that art. And now they feel like, oh, okay, I feel like I watched something that I felt was representative of our community. And then now I'm getting information that connects to that community, which I recognize my own community. Well, I have this question that I've been burning that I need to ask. And a lot of times the questions are not the things you can find on the CDC website. And some of these questions are very personal to these people. And they are struggling with these decisions. And to have someone there that's not going to be judging them is very, I think it's just eye-opening to them, and it does build trust within their own community. Because of one of the questions they will always ask the representative, they're like, well, are you from this area? And they're like, you know, I serve all these different areas. And like, oh, okay. But they're like, I was brought here referred by so-and-so. And they're like, oh, well, I trust that person. So now I know I can trust you. And then they go, and you were here for who? And we're like, well, your county commissioner set this up. Oh, I trust that commissioner. I'm glad they brought you here. What else do you do? So that to me is being able to just listen to the community and give them space. I think that's what art does. And it's sometimes, I feel like the one thing is the heart. I mean, it just attacks here, whereas you're not hitting them over the head with information right away, and they don't feel like you're judging them. They feel seen. So that's what we've been finding.
Beautifully put, Thomas. And I'm seeing lots in the chat. Does anyone want to jump in? Tyler, I think, were you getting ready to say something before?
Sure. Yeah, happy to jump in. And thanks for those comments, Thomas, and that experience. Yeah, I think so a couple of things. In the project that David and I worked on, so one thing we found, a kind of trust that was needed right away, was if we invited people to write poetry, we got one kind of response, and sometimes it was this. Like, I'm not ready to do that. And if we invited people to share their voice, right, or that what they needed, what they were going to say was something we wanted to hear, that was a totally different response, even though it was asking them with a poem to write back with imaginative language. And so, in a first step way, this was just in the invitation to participate, to be a part of something. It was really important to have that framing of sharing your voice with this project, as opposed to asking someone to write a poem. David and I swim in those waters every day, so we know the challenges of that, even though poetry, of course, has its amazing powers and tools as an art form. And then more broadly, I think the other part I would just point to is what we learned, I think, through the project is the less we focused exactly on the levers of vaccination, although that was one of the goals, the more likely it was that people were interested in what was happening. So by that, I mean the lived experience, the human dimensions around the last 2.5 years, and the way in which this project invited people to think about that was the way to talk about vaccination, as opposed to coming in and saying, we want to talk about vaccination, or we hope that we can talk about vaccination. We hope you might think about it. And so it was finding a way to honor and listen to and lift up that sort of a human dimension and all its complexity through the poems that are part of the project. So, and I'm echoing others in the power of storytelling and the power of listening, but that's the way it manifested in this project.
And I would just add, Tyler, to that, the what we discovered was the magic seed of Naomi Shihab-Nye's model poem to be that human experience, authentic, accessible, and we call it charging the air. You know, people would discover the website and read her poem and feel like I too can share how, you know, express myself in this way, in a way that's not typically what we think of as, you know, the difficulty of poetry. So finding, you know, one poem leads to another, one voice leads to another. I mean, Naomi's poem, I think, in a way that's a kind of trust. When I hear an authentic voice, I might not know someone, but if I hear them speak to me in a way that's believable and I can feel what they're saying, then there's a kind of little field tent that pops up of, we're sharing this space together in this stanza, in this work of art, in this poem, and we're not strangers anymore. There's a kind of, as Liang Li says, the inner voice of one person speaking to the inner voice of another. We're in this intimate conversation. We don't know each other, but the art form, and in this case, the leaping thought of poetry of our project, created that welcoming, safe space for people to not only share their voice and follow the prompt to type their own reflection onto the website and see it appear on the gallery page, but to read the voices of others. And so the gallery page kept growing and growing. And some people would go back and forth between reading other people's reflections and having that trigger something in their own experience.
I'd love to ask a question. You know, I think people are always desperate for a quote unquote playbook for how to do this, how to build trust. But the more I hear from people like yourselves, it's really a matter of narrative, which is inherently contextual for that community. And so it can't really be picked up and brought to a different community. So I'm curious how you speak with the people that you work with to help them understand how to do this. What are the things you tell others if they want to pick this up and actually do this?
David or Tyler, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Tyler, you want to go first?
You first.
Okay. Well, you know, there's a kind of sense in which, you know, the specificity, the idios, you know, to be authentic, to make an utterance that can translate and be heard by someone else, is to be unique to myself. So often the work of art, and certainly in poetry as a universal language, it builds a bridge across life experiences and cultures so that I can hear somebody else's, you know, we had contributions from 118 countries, you know, folks from all around the world. And yet the revelation was to hear, you know, Mossab from Palestine, to hear his Dear Vaccine poem that spoke about, you know, his own waiting for that vaccine and his concern for his children, to speak to my experience in Ohio, you know, as an American. And so, you know, maybe we undervalue the power of a shared human experience beyond the mechanics of translation and the barriers of that, whether it's dance, theater, poetry, art can bring us together in a deftly swift, and often, you know, we don't even notice it happening, and suddenly, you know, I feel this shared connection. You know, so we often talked about the project as offering people a means, a tool to make meaning of what they were going through, and not just the mechanics of a vaccine, but the emotional truth of what we were all living through and what we hoped and feared as we were trying to address this pandemic, to make meaning with language, because whether we are aware of it or not, we're narrating our stories. Language is a tool. It's what we use to make meaning in ourselves. But by sharing our voices to create a sense of connection with another, or a sense of belonging within a global group of people who cared about this and took the time and pause to share their voice. On the website, over 2,600 poems we collected from 118 countries over the course of about 10 months. So, Naomi called it the positive contagion. I saw, earlier on, there was a note talking about this need for the positive peer pressure. That being a thing, the positive contagion of an authentic poem that could get beyond the mechanics or the barriers of translation, in terms of grammar, how it connects people on a global conversation.
But I thought it's a more general thought to add to that, if this is a good moment for it. Ryan, what I have found in my work over the past 20 years is that local leaders of many kinds are looking for ways to engage their constituents around issues like today, vaccine confidence, but different things all the time. And those people include local elected officials wherever you are in this country, and probably in other countries too. They definitely include faith leaders who are trying to care for their congregations, or the people who they serve, education leaders, business leaders, even nonprofit leaders. They're all looking for ways to engage their communities. And we as artists have these amazing skills that we're really good at engaging people's emotions. And so if we can pair up with them, then we can serve their goals and at the same time serve our own. And what I found in my own experience is that, it's interesting to me to hear you all talking about the social capital that artists have, because I don't think of it quite that way. I think that a lot of times, a lot of people don't trust artists, and that may be particularly in the theater. There are a lot of people in Atlanta, but I think in every city, who feel like theater is not for them, like they don't attend the theater regularly. So it's actually more of a struggle for me in my work to figure out how I can partner with and support the work of leaders who the people who we all want to reach do trust, and I can bring my skills as an arts administrator and the skills of these amazing artists who I get to hire in service to that, rather than putting the artist sort of out there first as the trust me, I'm an artist. You're going to trust them through their work, because that's the nature of their work, is that it's personal and it's emotional and it touches you. But I wouldn't put them as the face of a program, actually.
I so appreciate that point of view, Ariel. Thank you for that. That's really,
Ariel and Tyler both. I mean, Tyler kind of mentioned the idea of sort of people's response to poetry. It reminded me, as Ryan had sort of mentioned in the chat earlier, we're doing some other salons, and one an offshoot that we did with the Getty Foundation, and the Getty Foundation is trying to support a series of exhibits on art and science. And during their early assessment, they spoke to a lot of stakeholders, and very clearly they were told, if you want to do a series on art and science, don't use the terms art and science, because they are terms that are elitist. They're priority. They're just people can't connect. And even the National Endowment for the Arts has benefited from learning this lesson, because they were criticized in the 80s and 90s for only funding the operas and the symphonies and the things that were perceived as being a more elite community. And as the National Endowment for the Arts has shifted to really supporting things like this, like the communities and art that is benefiting and coming from and serving the communities that they exist in, are real things. But I wonder if that's not something that some of you have experienced beyond what Ariel and Tyler have said, is that the assumption that artists automatically have trust within a community, I don't think can be assumed.
If I can jump, I think especially at the beginning of the pandemic, when the structures that were supporting artists industry-wide were completely decimated. And the response was, oh, well, that's just a hobby, or you can, you're fine. You look at the money that you made and that's not the case for the vast majority of artists. In fact, the vast majority of artists are still struggling so hard to get by. And it's partly because of that reason. People think the arts are just a nice thing to have and not something that we need to do in order to continue to engage our communities and ourselves in the kind of conversations that we want to be having and the kind of change that we want to be making. And if artists are a part of that conversation, then we can change it from the inside out rather than from the outside in, rather than somebody going to an artist and saying, oh, we know what will work for you. It's how can we use our voices to be able to how can we affect change most effectively? And I don't think that we've cracked it yet. I don't think that we have the structures in place for artists to be able to do so without these kinds of conversations, and without artists sharing, okay, this is the context in which I can be helpful. This is the context in which I can share my voice. And if we continue to have conversations like this, I think we'll be so much better off than where we are now.
Thank you, Pamela. I just want to support what you just said. It is one of my big goals in life to help elevate the role of the arts in my community through my work and make artists be seen in Atlanta, but hopefully everywhere, as vital contributors who you need to have at the table, no matter what kind of big local issue you're trying to address.
And it's like being in New York, everyone thinks like, oh, New York is just full of Broadway performers and you're working and you're doing this. And the answer is, I would love to be, but how can we work together to make that happen?
I was, my background is in the arts and I was trained in the arts, but, I'm thinking about, the conversations we had in graduate school and going through academia. And there was always this sort of assumption that, the arts are important, the arts are important. And I don't think anyone ever really articulated why. I mean, there is a lot of sort of grandiose language, but I think that, in this arena, as we actually are making I think it's really about the question of the language that we use to describe that connection. And, it can't be from the sort of lofty, the arts or, like some sort of connection to God and, all this sort of flowery thing. What we've talked about today is that connection and finding ways of articulating that in such a way that our administrators, that our policymakers, and all of the people within the system can understand and acknowledge that role and understand it. And I really think as I watch education change, across the universities, I think that the role of the artist is being taught differently than when I came up through the ranks. Instead of like trying to preserve some sort of sacred ideal, it's like the ideal that the artists are working. The artists are in there, with their hands dirty with blood and guts and really doing something that impacts society.
One of the swift little talk about words and naming that the PBS NewsHour did in titling their little segment after interviewing Naomi is they said citizen poets. Citizen poets give voice to their pandemic experiences, meaning, as we all have the capacity to express ourselves creatively, met with memorable leaping, as Robert Bly says, leaping thought of poetry. So I think what Tyler and I were orienting the Global Vaccine Poem Project to do was to, rather than say, for those artists in the community, share a poem, share your voice, but rather to say, for all of us, we have a human right to play with language and to be expressive and to participate in the joy of making art, in this case, poetry. So, I think I see that shifting culturally as well, that in theater, Swamp Gravy, some of the community theater, oral history, that go into communities, hear everybody's story. Now we're going to help script it and rehearse with everyone, whether it's in theater or in movement. And certainly in my experience with expressive writing, which is another way we frame the word, avoid the trigger word poetry. It's saying to be human, to be alive is to be expressive and to participate in the meaning making and joy making of that expression. Or as Mark Nepo says, if we don't express, that he's expressing ourselves is as fundamental as breathing, to be expressive. And if we don't express, we can become depressed. And we heard that from several people grateful for that opportunity to just, many people, the contributors note at the end of the book, 36 pages, we asked 165 contributors. It's amazing to read how many people say, I've never written a poem before. They're in this anthology. This is the first poem I've ever published. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out.
I love this. I think what we're all leaning into now is the sort of need for and the potential, tipping point or paradigm shift in American culture in terms of where the arts, reside in our perception and functionally in our society. They have been so separated from the fabric of life in comparison to many other cultures on the planet. So I am optimistic that we are at a shifting point, right? And I think the pandemic and in relation to health made the relationship between the arts and our individual and collective health more visible than before. I mean, we've seen, and we've seen even in research, we know that people have engaged with the arts more during the pandemic than they did before in much of the world. So I think we're at a very, very interesting moment. And I want to transition us in the time that we have remaining. And we've started to tip into language a little bit. So I just want to invite us to revisit that topic. But before that, a couple of people have joined us. I see Raleigh and Donald have joined. Raleigh and Donald, we started the meeting with an introduction. And I wonder if you all would like to introduce yourselves by sharing a little bit about who you are, where you're located, your affiliation, and a little bit about the work that you're doing on this project. Raleigh, would you be interested in starting us off?
Certainly. I am Raleigh Balmer. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Kids in the Spotlight. Kids in the Spotlight is a nonprofit organization that teaches foster and underserved youth how to grow from trauma through the power of storytelling and filmmaking. So in the confidence, the Vaccine Confidence Project, what we're doing is we used foster youth producers as well as an underserved individual to coordinate the program in an effort to create PSAs. So we brought in stakeholders from the community as well as foster and underserved youth in listening sessions to hear their ideas surrounding vaccine confidence, and the foster youth producers then developed scripts, and we brought in an industry professional director to direct the project, and we put those out on social media platforms as well as YouTube. So we're doing another Night of Confidence with our organization that'll be virtual. That is on July 13th. So just an overarching theme of having our artists via our industry professionals and those from the community that we're speaking to involved in the development of the materials that we speak to them with.
Beautiful. Thank you, Raleigh. Donald, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely.
Oh.
My name is Food Performance at the University of Houston. Oh.
We've got you now. Oh, no, you're a little bit broken up, Donald.
Breaking in and out. I apologize.
That's okay. It's a bit better. Do you want to try one more time?
Sure. Okay. Hopefully this one will work. Hello. My name is Donald Raven. I am a current doctoral candidate in flute performance at the University of Houston, and I'm also doing the Masters of Arts Leadership program there as well. I am the project manager for the Come Together Houston Community Arts and Health Partnership, and we are creating a performance series with 12 events throughout the Houston metropolitan area that isolates vaccine awareness and tries to encourage members of the Houston community to go out there and learn more about the vaccine and become educated in what we have to offer. So we have several resources available on our website. We're essentially trying to create a giant festival with the Houston Health Department and other entities related to the health experience. And we also have commissioned 4 artists for this project. Gonzo247, you might be familiar with his work. His work can be featured on Top Chef, and he's a muralist. And Outspoken Bean, who is a poet laureate of Houston, and the Mariachi Pumas of the University of Houston. And finally, we have the Urban Souls, which is an African-American dance organization here in Houston. So these 4 artists are presenting their vaccine-related work to the general public, and we've been working with other organizations to have vaccines available at our events and also provide materials that are relevant to educating the public about what the vaccine does and how the arts is a contributing factor to making that impact.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Donald. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really glad to have you with us and Raleigh. And I want to come back to this topic of trust that came up. And Theo, I think you meant, or language, sorry. Theo, I think you talked a little bit about language. Am I remembering correctly? You mentioned that as one of your challenges. And I wonder if you would start us off and talk a little bit more about the challenges that you're experiencing.
Sure. In fact, let me just take a big spoon and stir the pot really hard around one time. Picking up on Ariel and Pamela, I think we're making an assumption that we cannot make, that the arts, whatever that is, and I'm not sure what that is. I know what artists are, and there you've met one. But we're making an assumption that the arts are benevolent and believe in vaccines. I'm a blind in one eye, neurodiverse, queer hillbilly who grew up in southeastern Kentucky, and I can tell you the best arts going on was the church, and it was pageantry and music and all the things. And a lot of the vaccine hesitancy is coming from the pulpit in a lot of these places that are also using the arts equally, like we're talking about it here on the benevolent side of increasing trust. So I don't think we can make the assumption that the arts are just moving all in one direction, because that's not true. The other thing I keep thinking about too is Cambridge Analytica. A lot of the technology that the Trump administration weaponized at Cambridge Analytica got its start in President Obama's microfinancing campaign, where he gave $1 to the campaign, and then you got, you felt like you had a personal relationship to the campaign, and that worked for like 2 election cycles. And then Christopher Wiley, a gay fashion designer, neuroscientist, ends up at Cambridge Analytica, who worked on that campaign. So I think that there's more of a complex discussion here that we're not having. And I am an artist. So in the Ideas X Lab, my husband and I co-founded 10 years ago. We work with Hannah Drake, who some of y'all may know. It's gonna be 10 years old next year. I've been in the arts since I was a kid. I start from the place that the arts can do all the things we're talking about. I don't need a study to tell me that. But how do we approach this in a way that recognizes that we're living in a country that by any measure you look at, we're 50-50 at best. And then depending upon issues, it's probably going to be more conservative on issues, not more liberal on issues. And so I'm thinking about, like, how do we acknowledge that people are always going to come into places with different value systems, and it is almost impossible to change a value system. So what we are talking about also may work for those who are already maybe right on the edge of like, yeah, do I get the vaccine? Well, maybe I'll go there. So because we have a history of 25 years of worksite wellness programs that we know don't work. And yet they make leaders feel really good that they're doing something for worksite wellness, even though there is almost no evidence that worksite wellness programs do what they say they're going to do. They have a PR value for them, but are they working? No. And so like, I would love to see us as we kind of move forward, really get into the mix and like have people that represent the full value spectrum of the communities all at the table. And let's get a little messy. Let's argue. And I think the arts can hold space for those conversations without going in with the arts being used as the tool that's going to convince one group that they're thinking wrong.
Right.
So how do we kind of maybe transition some of this work into a way that's more oriented toward surfacing where there is opportunity, as opposed to trying to convince people who may not be implying that their way of thinking about the world is wrong? Because, you know, even like Teresa Mobley at Harvard, that studies the environmental conditions of creativity, she has a new research study out that she's looked at it in terms of like retirement. And so what we tend to think about is retirement is like, oh, you transition, but we know that there's a kind of a set of cognitive decline that we see when people retire. Well, we have conflated our work identities and our personal identities so firmly with each other in this country that when you retire, you're not just leaving a job, you're separating from an identity. And so what has been shown in her work is that people who have those creativity opportunities attached to their job role in the 5 years leading up to retirement have a higher quality of life, have a higher well-being status in the 5 years after retirement. She did not find the same thing at all with the creativity opportunities not connected to the job role. And so when you think about creativity opportunities and kind of going back into that church context, connected to, you know, something that is incredibly subjective and incredibly personal, your eternal salvation or your atheist or non-belief in God, like how do you gotta, people are not just a vaccine decision, they bring all that shit. We all do. Life is messy with us. And so what I would love to see us do is to how do we structure a way for the arts to kind of facilitate some messiness with people who absolutely are not with us on this. And then what can we learn from that? Is there a place for some compromise that we might be able to work toward? That feels to me like a conversation that is increasingly, in my mind, in the last couple of weeks, increasingly important for us to be having.
You know, I really appreciate that. I think that's one of the itchy parts of the back of my mind when we were saying, when we titled the last project, Boosting Vaccine Confidence with the Arts, is like it's assuming that the arts are all moving in one direction. And I think you just really beautifully articulated that. But I think one of the problems with the messiness is I don't even know how to begin to get out of that. I mean, you know, it's like we went with this title because I couldn't think of exactly how to approach the very issues that that you're talking about. And I think that's you know, there's sort of this commonality that has brought this group together, but I think you're right. It means how do we bring other people in at the right time to have that messy conversation, and how do we create the platform where it's a productive conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think artists are particularly good with that kind of messiness, right? With failure and with ambiguity and with messiness. And, you know, I think that is one place where artists can help hold space among the broader arena that I think you're thinking about, Theo. And yeah, totally appreciate your point. I mean, we're not talking about any sort of magic pills or panaceas here, right? But that artists have a place in these spaces where we're trying to sort, you know, these issues and ideas. Yeah, and that messiness, I mean, that's a big cultural question, right? I mean, and we are existing in so much messiness right now. It just simply can't be avoided. Other thoughts? I'm seeing the chat. We've got just a few more minutes, maybe a couple final thoughts, and then I'm going to hand it back to JD to wrap us up today.
Yeah, I know one of our kind of guideposts for that is for all of our programs is just to create a space for positive, meaningful interactions around the subjects that we feel like are most important to our community among people who have differing viewpoints. So, you know, a very large amount of the work that we do, and most notably in our equitable dinners programs, is facilitated conversations about racial justice and racial equity among racially diverse strangers over dinner, launched by short plays. So it's, you know, the goal is not necessarily I think can't be for everyone to walk away believing what you want them to believe at the end of an afternoon, but to have positive, meaningful interaction around a subject that matters among people with differing opinions. It's like, that's what we're aiming for.
Yeah, and Ariel, that's beautifully put. I mean, I want to note that the work that the CDC undertook in engaging the arts and artists was really about facilitating dialogue and creating space wherein people can explore their own values, ideas, perceptions, make their own decisions, engage with others in their communities to have those kinds of dialogues. You know, recognizing we had so much dialogue about, you know, the power of the arts to persuade and the double-edged sword of that. You know, historically, the power of the arts has been used for evil, it's been used for good. It is undeniable that the arts and artists have unique power. And I think this is a space, and back to the points of the sort of arts and, you know, where do the arts fit in our society? Where do artists fit? I think we're at a moment where we are approaching a broadening of roles. Artists have always been agents of social change, always, always, always in human history. You know, that is a given. But in the United States, I think artists really have been sidelined and in a particular way that I'm optimistic is shifting, and you're all a part of that in really, really important ways. And this dialogue is so incredibly important. So thank you for sharing in this dialogue. JD, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Thank you, everyone who shared. It really is giving me some thoughts about next steps and what we do at the salon. I'm going to ask Ryan to post the Google Doc collaboration form one more time, and I do want this to become a living document where at any point that you have an idea or a suggestion or just something that you want to include, we'll try to include all of the text, chat text from this conversation as well. But this will be an ongoing living document for this this group as we move forward. I think our next salon is scheduled for the same time on July 28th. So please put that on your calendar. We'll send you out more data soon. I think Ryan also just listed the link to the Google Drive. So if you have documents that you know, rather than just providing a link in the Google Doc, please add them to the Google Drive. So thank you again, Jill, Alana, Ryan. Is there anything that I'm missing that we need to conclude on? I think we have had a very successful first session.
Yeah, totally. And I just have such deep respect for everyone's time. An hour and a half is a big chunk of time. And I think JD and I have really had in mind that this time is to support you all. So if there are topics that would be really instrumental and useful for you, for us to engage here, please let us know.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.